And welcome everyone to our 8th IJNA webinar on the artifact collection of the Nossa Senhora da Consolação. Rick, I hope I said that correctly. And our two speakers today are first Cezar Mahumane and Celso Simbine. And I'd like to give you some short bios of our speakers so you know where they're coming from. And they join us today from Mozambique. It is Cezar, who will be our first author and speaker, I believe. And he is a Mozambican maritime archaeologist who's currently a PhD student at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. There he is. And he holds a master's in maritime archaeology from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And he is currently a lecturer in maritime archaeology in the Department of Archaeology and Anthropology at the University of Eduardo Mondlane in Mozambique, and the director of the Center of Archaeology Research and Resource of Mozambique Island. Over the last few years, he has worked on different research programs on Mozambique Island with an emphasis on the slave wrecks project and development of in situ preservation strategies for shipwrecks and training of local monitors in the preservation of maritime heritage. So welcome, Cezar. And our second speaker is Celso Simbine, who is also a Mozambican maritime archaeologist, who is currently a PhD student at the University of Pretoria as well, and holds a master's in science and maritime archaeology from the University of Cape Town. He's a lecturer assistant in practical archaeology and museology in the Department of Archaeology and Anthropology at Eduardo Mondlane University. And for over 7 years, he has been working in intertidal ethnoarchaeological underwater geophysical surveys and terrestrial archaeological excavations in the scope of the Slave Wrecks Project and the SAREC CETA. So welcome to both of our speakers, and I will hand it over to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Athena. Thank you, Mark, and thank you to the journal for inviting us for this session today. We will be presenting the paper that was published by the International Journal of Nautical Archaeology on the reinterpretation of artifact collection from the Nossa Senhora da Consolação wreck. So we will be addressing some of the key aspects on the study of this collection. And I should mention that is a comparative study mostly, and my colleague Celso will be doing some key notes at the end of the presentations. So I will start my presentation. So first to say that the discovery of the sea route around the Cape of Good Hope by Vasco da Gama in 1498 allowed the creation of new maritime trade dynamics between Europe, Africa, and the Indies, with the establishment of the Carreira de Indias route, which increased substantially the maritime trade in Indian Ocean. In this period, Mozambique Island played an important role in mediating the maritime network, since Portuguese vessels were following this route, often passing through Mozambique Island to resupply, repair, wait for the monsoon, and heal the sick, and also shelter shipwrecked people. So what we will be doing essentially is going through this is the paper that is available online. It is open source for those who want to download it and go much more deeper in the presentation that we will be doing tonight. As a maritime archaeology and going more into historical periods, for this shipwreck in particular, the start of it, we had to start from the written resources. And I should mention two documents here that were considered the main ones that gave us mostly the clues to kind of reinterpret this shipwreck. The first one was a report written by Quirino da Fonseca in the 1960s, where he describes a shipwreck that was a ship that was burned in Mozambique Island during a Dutch siege to this island in 1608. So these written resources kind of gave us a first clue about the presence of this wreck in Mozambique Island. So we kind of had to go deeper into literature in order to trying to really understand which wreck is this one, and also looking into different archaeological evidence that were raised in Mozambique Island. But I'll be explaining this during the presentation. The second one, which is a book written by a soldier that was in Mozambique Island during the Dutch attack in 1608, was written by Durão, and is called Cercos de Moçambique, defendidos por Dom Estevão de Atayat, who was the governor of Mozambique Island in this period. So in this chapter, he basically describes how this ship, the Nossa Senhora da Consolação, wrecked during the Dutch siege to Mozambique Island. So these were the two main documents that we relied on to kind of look at the archaeological materials, and also do a comparison to try to really see what is the identification of the wreck, and do some comparison of the material that were found. So in terms of underwater cultural heritage, Mozambique Island was recognized in the early 1960s by Quirino da Fonseca, who carried out the first underwater survey program. Quirino da Fonseca was able to identify three main areas in Mozambique Island where shipwreck occurred, especially in front of the channel of the San Sebastian Fort, the area near San Lorenzo Fort, and also in Cabaceira Pequena. These were considered the three main areas where the wreck would be mostly found. And what we could see here is that from the map, the areas that have been described in the 1960s by Quirino da Fonseca tend to be the areas where we found most of the shipwrecks in Mozambique Island. So most of these wrecks, I should mention, these were kind of disturbed by commercially oriented activities during the 1999 to 2014, when the Mozambican government decided to end the commercially oriented activities that were carrying out by a treasure hunting company. So since then, the Edward Mondlane University has been carrying out researches in Mozambique Island in order to first study the collection that have been raised by these treasure hunters, but also to find ways to protect and preserve this heritage. So this article, or the paper that we're presenting here, mostly is a kind of an effort to reinterpret the material that were raised by the treasure hunters and were left unprotected for many years. So the history of this wreck here, which is the Nossa Senhora da Consolação, we kind of go back to the 1604, when the first Dutch attack started to happen in Mozambique Island. So essentially, because of the commercial competitions between the Portuguese and the Dutch in the 17th century, they started to fight for territory. And Mozambique Island was one of the area where the Dutch and the Portuguese were battling, especially for the geographical position, because Mozambique Island was considered to be strategically located to get access to different ports or areas along the Eastern African coast. Mozambique Island tended to be an area where ships would find shelter when they were out there with bad weather, or even to repair the ships or to heal the sick people. So Mozambique Island kind of developed this role, and it was a very important place during the 16th century, even during the pre-colonial times, but we will be focusing here mostly on the history of this wreck. So the first attack in 1604, the Portuguese were able to defend the fort, but even though the Dutch tried to occupy it, and on the second attack that happened in 1607, it was led by Paul van Cardal and a fleet of 8 Dutch ships that once again the Portuguese were able to defend Mozambique Island. However, the Dutch presence caused a delay of Portuguese fleets going to India, which included the Nossa Senhora da Consolação, which was one of the ships that were heading to India, coming from Portugal, heading to India. So because this wreck lost the monsoon because of this Dutch attack in 1607, it had to winter in Mozambique Island to leave in the following year, which was the 1608. So during this time, when the Nossa Senhora da Consolação was getting ready to leave the Mozambique Island harbor, the Dutch again attacked the island, and they found the Nossa Senhora da Consolação wintering or getting ready to leave to India. So in this occasion, there were a battle in front of the fort, and because the fort didn't have enough gunpowder to protect the ships that were along the on the fort, some of them were taken by the Dutch, including the Nossa Senhora da Consolação. But when the ship was being pulled out of the bay, it got straightened on a shoal on shallow water on their way out from the channel, so close to an area that is known now as Cabaceira Pequena. At this moment, when the Dutch took the Nossa Senhora da Consolação, there were 3 men on board the ship that were unable to stop the capture, and the ship was loaded with cloth, ivory, lead, coins, and also other commodities that were going to be traded in India. However, she got stranded on the shoal due to the low tide, and taking advantage of that, the Portuguese sent some soldiers during the night to set fire on the ship, and causing it shipwreck, and to avoid it to be taken by the Dutch. So after some time, is when we started to have in the 1960s, the first research that were carried out by Quirino da Fonseca. He was here trying to identify not only the main areas where this heritage is around Mozambique Island, but he was also trying to identify this particular wreck, the Nossa Senhora da Consolação. He was not really clear where the area of the wreck was, but he knew that this wreck was somewhere in Mozambique Island. So he developed, I would say, really great methodologies at this time in 1960s, using aerial photographies to find wrecks, because the water in Mozambique Island is super clear, so they could see different areas where some remains of shipwrecks. Although he was unable to identify the Nossa Senhora da Consolação wreck, he identified 3 main areas in Mozambique Islands that were where mostly could be found shipwrecks. So later on, during the 1999 to 2014, a company called Archaeological Worldwide was working in Mozambique Island with a permit, but they were intervening in different shipwrecks in Mozambique Island. But one of the most disturbed shipwreck was this one, the Nossa Senhora da Consolação, also identified as IDM 003. And during 2005 and 2006, this wreck was extensively excavated. And from here, they were able to collect different sort of archaeological materials and expose a wooden hull of the ship, a wooden hull of the ship that was exposed, coins, lead, lead ingots that were collected from the wreck, and also some local ceramics and the whole range of materials that we will be analyzing here. So the number of artifacts that were collected by this company during the excavation of the Nossa Senhora da Consolação is unknown, mainly because the artifact assemblage with commercial value were immediately sold. However, those with non-commercial valuable were left in storeroom in Mozambique Island, and part of it is what is being analyzed here in this paper. So in this paper here, we are analyzing the remains that were left by these companies, and the main methodology employed for the ongoing artifactal analysis comprises a comparison studies of indicative artifacts from the wreck with similar assemblage recovered in other relevant and contemporary shipwreck and terrestrial sites to understand the dimension of the trade network in which the Nossa Senhora da Consolação was involved. Well, one of the first, here we can see the remain of the wooden hull that was left by the company, and also part of the collection that was been raised by this company, and part of it are still available in Mozambique Island, and that's why we decided to look at this aspect and analyze them. So we will start by looking at the boat-shaped lead ingot. When the Nossa Senhora da Consolação wreck was first located in 2001 by the company, they have collected 6 boat-shaped lead ingot, and they say that with wasteful identification purposes, but nothing has never been said from the samples that were collected. So in the excavation that they have conducted in 2006, they have found 106 similar boat-shaped lead ingot found in a single square. Each of them were weighing approximately 50 kilograms and measuring 65 centimeters in length and approximately 65 centimeters in length. So in total, it is estimated that 5 tons of these lead ingots were collected from this wreck. So all the lead ingots were unfortunately sold, and they are no longer available for any analysis in Mozambique Island, but relying on some of the images and pictures that we could have assessed, we know that all the lead on board the Nossa Senhora da Consolação had a triangular transversal section, narrow toward the end. One of the flat surfaces of the ingot were showing circular marks, as shown on the image. That may be indication of the ownership. So generally, lead ingots in maritime archaeology are well published, and thanks to that, we were able to do some kind of comparative studies with lead ingots that were found in different shipwrecks along the East African, along the Indian Ocean, but also in other parts of the world. And the most precise method to date ingot is by identification of marking. Has it provide authentic information concerning the metal trade by the specific company or a certain year of manufacture? And the boat-shaped lead ingot from the Nossa Senhora da Consolação, all of them had a stamped market on the surface, but because we only have access to the images of this boat lead ingots, was kind of difficult to identify the mark which is on this lead. So But historically, the maritime trade, lead has played a major role, as by the 17th century, it was being used for multiple purposes. It could be resmelt into musket balls or cartridge shot or anchor stocks for seals, and also stamp or furniture part. Um, but many European countries bought lead to use as cargo or paying ballast. So it appears that the vessel coming from European countries carried lead, which was relatively cheap, heavy, durable, with already a ready market to be sold. And for the case of the Nossa Senhora da Consolação, by analyzing its capacity and also the number of the lead that have been identified or found, we could see that this lead is clearly being on board as cargo. The second aspect that we analyzed here were the coins. So they have mentioned that 37 coins have been identified on this wreck, but most of them were in poor conservation condition. As we can see here, some of them they still present signs of burnt, and most of the coins do not show a Portuguese marking, and it suggests that the coins are more likely to have emanate from the Spanish Empire, because at the time when Portugal was linked to the Spanish Empire through the Philippines dynasty. So historical resources have said that during the mid-16th century, European countries didn't have silver mines except for Spain, and the only nation mining silver in Mexican mines. Silver coins were the dominant currency in European and international market during the 16th and to the 18th centuries, which are also some of these silver coins that we analyzed here. They share some similarities with coins that we also find in another shipwreck in Portugal, which is the Nossa Senhora dos Mártires. This collection coins, they kind of share some similarities. Although this collection still being stored there in Mozambique Island for further numismatic and archaeological investigation in terms of looking more specifically to their composition. The other elements that we also analyzed here in terms of getting a sense of the areas, and also how much within the which network this ship was involved. At the Nossa Senhora da Consolação, there have been reported 49 lead seals that were analyzed and divided into three main categories. One are considered as being the custom seals, cloth seals, and also personal seals. The difference that we have identified here is that the cloth seals, they were used to certify cloth quality or its provenience, and some of them are pretty much found into this collection. And among the cloth seal assemblage found in Nossa Senhora da Consolação, there are two peculiar seals with different iconography motifs depicted. One has three letters stamped, which was 1A, and two linked C's, and is likely to be an indication of the private or personal seal of someone responsible for cloth production. So, which is this seal here, and within the line A is one of the seals that is depicted, and the other seal also has a horse and a pole depicted on them. Basically, this is also linked to the idea of religious symbolism that was linked to the hope that God will protect the products along the way against piracy or wreckage, as their losses were expensive at this time. And the other kind of seals that we do found here is what are called as custom seals. These seals were introduced in Portugal in January 1547 to control imported and exported goods. Those taxed goods were certified using these sort of custom seals, as we can see here on the line B. And these seals were used to control the quality of the products and also those that have been taxed. And the main iconographic feature that can be seen here on this type of seals is the representation of the Esfera Almiral, which was introduced as a symbol of maritime economic and political power linked to navigation and representing the Portuguese supremacy on the world. The other type of material or artifacts that we also had a look are these hippopotam tusks. So, and a specific number of hippopotam tusks have been identified on this rack. But during the mid-16th and early 17th century, the Portuguese had the monopoly of trading elephant tusk and hippopotam teeth to the Indies and obtained finished objects that were taken to Europe to satisfy the increasing demand of ivory. The majority of elephant tusk and hippopotam teeth found on Caridas in the shipwreck are likely to be African. However, we haven't conducted any sort of further studies on these elephant tusk. These studies is mostly based on comparison because the African elephant tusk can measure up to 2 meters in length, and what we could see from the collection that is there, it is quite solid, and they have tend to be more shiny. So in general, the maritime trade record also suggests that Central Africa and the West Africa coast and also the East African coast are likely to be the main source of elephant tusks and the hippopotam teeth. So from these regions, ivory was transported to the great trade centers in India, where artisans were more skilled in crafting these sort of materials. However, these kind of artifacts, or as I've mentioned, they're still available there in Mozambique Island, and we hope to be analyzing them through different methods to try to identify the location where this ivory could have come from. We do also found here Mardaban jars and in this excavation, and they were found 3 entire Mardaban jars. These jars are mostly considered as storeware, and these jars were used to store and preserve liquids and other sort of delicate and precious goods on board. When we were doing the comparison studies, we could see that some of these sort of jars, they share similarities with also those that were found in Nossa Senhora dos Mártires shipwreck in Portugal. And the two complete Martaban jars and many other shells found in Nossa Senhora da Consolação, right? They also share similarities with fragments that were found in other land sites in Portugal. And the Martaban jars from the Nossa Senhora da Consolação are contemporaneous with other wrecks, as the Nossa Senhora dos Mártires, and that the typology indicates that these jars would have been imported to Portugal in the late 16th century, and most of the Martaban jars arrived in Portugal and Europe during the 17th centuries because of the intensification of the commercial networks between Asia, Africa, and Europe. The other category of artifacts that we also were found in this wreck are what is also called as the olive jars. They are very common to be found in shipwrecks, especially from the 16th and 17th century. And the olive jars, they are very, very famous and very, very well known from different shipwrecks and also some land sites. Although most literature classifies the olive jars as being exclusively Spanish in production, it is known that Portugal also were producing this kind of vessels. And on the seat of Aveiro, for instance, it was known for manufacturing olive jars that were shipped for trade in large quantities since the mid 16th century onward. One of the main interesting finds on this wreck we could consider is the presence of the locally pottery, which we think is also a very interesting and raises a lot of questions and discussions in terms of the temporal and the spatial spread of this sort of pots. Of pots. Well, the Lumbu pottery tradition was first named by Paul Sinclair in the 1985 because of the excavation that he carried out in the mainland in the Lumbu area close to Mozambique Island. During the excavations, Sinclair found a significant ceramic collection that allowed the description of the pottery tradition characterized by fine incised lines, shell and comb stamping, triangular bands, and other geometrical motifs. This tradition is mostly associated with later coastal farming communities, and archaeological evidence suggests that it stretches along the Mozambican coast from Sofala to Cabo Delgado, linked to the development based on the maritime resource exploitation for food supply and economic exchange dominated by the Swahili communities. However, investigations that were carried out in the southern Tanzania at Mikindani site have revealed the presence of comb stamping ceramics dated from the 12th century, similar to those of the Lumbu pottery tradition, suggesting that these ceramics are not only confined to Mozambique territory, but they also found in southern Tanzania. The presence of these Lumbu pots on this wreck also raises a lot of questions in terms of looking to the reconstructing the local trading pattern and raising questions about the temporal spread of the pottery tradition, because on terrestrial sites reveals that this pot ceramics normally dates from the 3rd to the 15th centuries, and these land sites have been dated through radiocarbon date. And while it spread and its appearance in the 17th century shipwreck suggests a continuous use of Lumbu pottery in Mozambique Island, although it may have changed from domestic context to being a local trade good and part of the maritime trade. However, so this is also a big discussion that is being raised here in terms of the presence of this pottery in the context of this specific wreck. So, in a nutshell, looking into all the archaeological material that have been raised and the ongoing analysis on these artifacts from the Nossa Senhora da Consolação, it shows that it made important contribution to the commercial network in the 17th century. For instance, the presence of old shepherd-lead ingots, which were most likely molded in England and apparently were being acquired by the Dutch, used to buy lead in the boat shape. And these also show the presence of all these elements that we're analyzing here shows that The artifact collection from this rack derives from different contexts around the globe, as shown along the presentation, from the local trade routes that were supplying raw materials or finished finds that fed the growing maritime global trade in the 17th century. These routes were mostly dominated by the Portuguese that established the Carreira das Indias and invested in shipbuilding to sail to the Indies to buy spices and other exotic goods appreciated in Europe. The variability of the Nossa Senhora da Consolação artifacts tells stories of the beginning of an increasing globalized trade and control of strategic maritime harbors. The recovery of artifacts like the lead seals were important to testify quality and border control, while coins showed the monetarized system for products exchange. Elements like lead ingot would be used for several other purposes, had it could be remelt to produce other elements. Ivory and hippopotam tusks could also be crafted by skilled artisans to obtain final products that fed the trade. On the other hand, containers like the martaban and olive jars were utilitarian objects used to store liquids or grain-like cargoes. Coarse earthenware pots like the Lumbu pottery could have changed from domestic context to being a local trade good as part of the maritime trade. However, substantial data from other wrecks are necessary to understand the role of coarse earthenwares on board the European ships. As a trade ship, the Nossa Senhora da Consolação was following its course to Indies loaded with goods ready to be commercialized, but it found its fate on Mozambique Island due to the commercial competition that arose in the 17th century between the Portuguese and the Dutch. And we could see it from the historical accounts that were presented by Durão and also Da Fonseca that showed the historical accounts of this ship. And we hope that in the future we will enrich our understanding of the Africa Past maritime initiatives, that even studies that are carried out in the so-called historical European shipwreck can shed new lights. These will help us to understand the role, the time frame, and the spatial distribution of local African initiatives that are mostly overlooked into the discipline. So I would like to say also thank you to all our partners that have been supporting us and when conducting these projects in Mozambique Island, but into this specific project that we were looking into the artifact collection of this particular shipwreck. Having said this, I'd like to say thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Cezar and Celso, for that really nice summary of the shipwreck that you've been working on. And I would just like to say it is, again, open access, so you can visit the IJNA website. And until May, I believe, the paper will be you'll be able to download the paper. And at this time also, I'd like to open the floor for questions. We have, I think, some coming through our feature. Can we see here
I could be cheeky and ask one.
Yes, please go ahead, Mark.
Thank you. Do you know how many artifacts were recovered by Archaeonautus and how many you've been able to get access to? So are you looking at 50% of the collection or 10% of the collection?
Yeah.
Okay, could we jump in now?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay. So, it's quite a tough question. It's difficult to say because looking into their records, even in numbering the artifacts, we find a lot of problematic aspects. So it's difficult to say how many artifacts have been raised, even though they have done an inventory of some of the materials that were being collected during the excavation, which we also got access to that. But sometimes when we go to the collection that is still available there from the excavations they have done, some of the aspects are a bit confusing. So I would say kind of the 50% of those collections still from this particular rack still there. So no Celso.
And I can also add saying that in 2014, I was indicated by the Department of Archaeology and Anthropology to go there and count the material that they recover so that I can deliver them, give them to the Museum of Mozambique Island, where we analyze this material because now they're under control of the museum there. And one of the big problems is that as they were no longer there, their contract were cancelled. They were no longer taking care of these materials. So they left them mixed with other shipwrecks because they were running out of funding so that they could conserve them. Even the tags, some of archaeological material were there without tags, and some of them were still in the tanks with water with a thin tag, and was everything mixed up. So it's completely difficult because a lot of them, they were out of context. So we just worked with those with the tag, but we still have some that we don't know their origins. So they were just taken out from the underwater archaeological site, but we don't know the context. So it's difficult to be precise exactly what they took out.
But I think what you've demonstrated in your presentation tonight and also in the article is the wealth of information you can still get out of this highly disturbed site. And that, I think, is also because of your patience of going through it's not only an excavation, which takes time and patience and documentation skills, but also in a way you're re-excavating an excavation. And that I think is extremely admirable. So I really think you've managed to tease a lot out of the information that you have available to you. And one of the things that's very interesting is the presence of the lumbo pots, because that's something that's very unique, isn't it?
Yes, and because of that, it also raises a lot of questions in terms of the temporal and also the spatial spread of this pottery. I mean, Celso has been also conducting some works on land sites and have been finding interesting stuff that gonna lead us to a more understanding of the presence of this pottery. I mean, of this sort of ceramics. But yeah, it's really interesting, and it's giving us another perspective of the presence of these ceramics.
And most of ceramics of this lumbu, when you do excavations, they are found after Sankul tradition pottery, which seems like very recent. So which means that when we dig terrestrially, we have like a stratigraph sequence, which even can tell that this kind of ceramic might be one of the ceramics that is responsible or might tell us something related to the formation of Swahili culture in the northern of Mozambique. But the problem is in Mozambique, as we had like 15 years without having an opportunity to do research in the northern of Mozambique. It's a long time. So we still have a big lake in terms of knowledge related to archaeological context compared to the northern of Eastern African coast, I mean Tanzania and in Kenya, where they are advanced, because 15 years without having a possibility to do research, it's a long time. So now one of the things that we're trying to do in terms of terrestrial archaeology is to set up a very well-established chronology sequence of the development of this history of Eastern African coast is something that we're still working on so far. And we want to link the terrestrial archaeology and also the underwater archaeology, because we cannot disassociate it, because it's something which has to relate. Because even where I'm digging, however, I'm finding a lot of local ceramic, but it's mixed with imported exotic material like porcelain, like beads. So we have to relate, because if this, we know that this is something that was circulated into interconnected long distance trade, which was done by ships, which and somehow they became shipwrecks, which we have.
I think we have a few more questions for you. So there's a question here about, take my glasses off to read it. Is there a possibility of you finding some human bones? I have heard from Cezar's discussion that you found some ivory, and that raised the question towards finding any kind of human remains. Is that something you could speak about?
Well, so far we haven't found any remains of any human remains on the wrecks in Mozambique Island. And I guess that's going to be something difficult, because most of them have been disturbed in the past. So the possibility of finding human remains, I mean, it's less probable that we do, but I don't know, maybe, but I don't really think so. Mhm.
Can I come in back in, Athena?
Yes, please, Mark.
In this particular incident, did they scuttled, they sank their own ship, they set fire to their own ship to stop it, to prevent it being captured?
Yes, based on the written resource and this book of Durand, he kind of describes the whole scenario, what happened there, and they set fire on the ship to avoid it being taken by the Dutch. And then during the beginning of the 17th centuries, these two nations were battling for kind of the shipbuilding technologies and all these things. So avoiding them to take their ships was also setting fire on the ship was also a way to avoid it to be taken by the Dutch.
So yeah, so a crew member would have to have been very unlucky to have been left on board when they set fire to it. So I don't think you're likely to find human remains. But do you know anything about the ship before this, in terms of, is it the first time it appears in any historical account, or do we know anything about its trade routes before the 1608 attack?
Well, before that event, well, we don't really have anything on the accounts, like what was the other sort of activities it was doing. What we know is just it left Lisbon in 1607, right, heading to the Indies. But because it was caught during the 1607 Dutch attack in Mozambique Island, so it was during the monsoon change. So it lost the monsoon to go straight to India. So it had to winter in Mozambique Island. So during this time, when they were getting ready to sail to India, the Dutch were attacking again, which was in 1608, was when it was captured and then set on fire by the Portuguese.
But you don't know it. There's no evidence for voyages prior to 1607.
No, we don't have those
No.
those
Or even when it was built. Do you know what year it was built?
Not really.
No. Okay,
Not
interesting.
really.
I wonder whether there must be the Portuguese historians that that might be able to assist.
Yeah, sure.
We have another question here from our audience. How many olive jars were found on board? Were they for an ongoing shipment, or are there examples found on land in Mozambique? And the second question is, were the Mataban jars found in the galley, and could the galley be identified?
Well, what we know is that what have been reported based on the inventory that we had access to it is that 36 olive jars were found there on the wreck. But as I was saying in my first answer, we're not really really sure about how many artifacts were raised, because it could have been that more of those were raised there. So we're not really sure. But based on what we have on the inventory, and we were also counting them like one by one, there were 36 of these olive jars.
Yeah. And in addition, something very strange in this island, when we do terrestrial excavation on island and in mainland, we don't find this kind of oliver jars and marta buns, but it's very often appears faience, beads, and porcelains and glass bottles, but this kind of oliver jar in particular and marta buns never found. It's also normal to find willed ware ceramic, which is very typical known to Tanzania, where it was found for the first time, and other local ceramics like carinated ceramics, which are related to slavery contest in the Eastern African coast. And you can also find like barn shed ceramics and red painted ceramics. But these two types, well, I don't know why, but they don't appear in terrestrial contests.
And from the remains of the shipwreck, from what you've been able to ascertain, have you any guess as to where the galley might have been? Or is that something that's not possible? It's so disturbed or not preserved?
Yeah, I mean it's difficult to say. Yeah, because I mean we couldn't get much information of that on the wreck.
Yeah.
Mm.
We have another question for you. Is it possible to locate any of the current owners or buyers of the boat-shaped ingots that were sold by Archaeological? Do you know where those might be in the world?
Well, by this time it have been all melted somewhere, but we do had, because we were also digging the archives, right? There is a paper, a document in where they sell it to a company. I can't remember now the name of the company, but there's a document that describes that they were selling these lead ingots for their company. Yeah.
If there's any more questions, please put them in the chat. I just want to remind everyone that this article is open access, and it will be part of IJNA volume 53.1, which will be coming to you in June. So it'll be one of the main articles, the research articles. And Mark has just put the link to the open access article in the chat. One of the things that I think I'd like to point out too, which touches upon the ivory, is that shipwrecks like these are very interesting because they're starting to, along with the DNA studies of ivory, really starting to rewrite the history of the trade in ivory, where you talk about it coming from Africa, going to India to be worked, whereas it wasn't that long ago that it was finds of ivory were thought to be the ivory found in India was thought to be Indian ivory, and sometimes it is, but the presence of African elephant ivory there as well has now suddenly, I'd say within the last decade, really been something that is now accepted and proved. So it's nice to see it also represented possibly with the cargo that you have. Is there any plans to try and do any kind of DNA studies, if possible?
Yeah, that's something we would really like to do, to have some DNA studies on those ivory because they're still sitting there in Mozambique Island, and that would also be great to be looking at where this ivory would be coming from, because there's a lot of theories in terms of where the ivory were being sourced in Africa. Some might say it come from Eastern Africa because during this 16th, 17th century, places like the northern Mozambique and Tanzania going straight to Kenya, there were these communities of the Ajawas that is said that they used to hunt elephants to source for ivory, and they might be also supplying this ivory to the Portuguese. But to understand how this really happened, it's also important to do these DNA studies on those ivory, because we can also relate to the roots that are kind of well established on the land archaeology and also in the historical records. So this is something that we also are looking forward to do with the collection that is still there.
Great. Are there any other questions for our presenters tonight? In that case, I want to say also just thank you both to Cezar and to Celso for being with us tonight and for your article. We look forward, hopefully, to hearing more and follow-up articles about your research, and to hear how these global maritime networks are really being redefined. And it struck me in listening to your presentation, our last webinar in December was about the Purísima Concepción, a Spanish ship that stranded off the coast of Argentina in 1765. And there was a lot of discussion about the artifacts on that shipwreck and about the global networks. But what's nice and totally unplanned was having your talk here also pushing back that discussion a century and a half earlier to give us a really good overview of the maritime global networks that were happening. And truly, the last figure that you showed in your talk, that map of the networks, every connection that shipwreck had touched upon was almost every continent except Antarctica. And that's really amazing to see in the beginning of the 17th century. So thank you for presenting this, and thank you both for being with us, and for our audience for staying with us on a Friday night or maybe morning, wherever you might be. So I'd like with that to sign off and thank again our presenters, and thank you again for joining us for this 8th IJNA webinar.
Thank you, Athena. And from the NES, thanks to Cezar and Celso as well, of course, and to the Honor Frost Foundation for making this educational experience possible. As I said at the beginning, I'll get this on YouTube early next week, so look out for it. It'll be posted onto the website as well, and to social media platforms, so obviously share it far and wide. So enjoy the rest of your day or evening, as Athena said, depending on where you are in the world. We'll say goodbye. Good night, everybody.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.